from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is a special programming, part of a series on the Justine DeNoor murder trial that's occurring out in the Midwest city of Minneapolis. The title of this episode is the Justine Ruszczyk-Damond murder trial and the blue wall. We'll work on that title. Need to cut down some of the words in the editorial process. One of the things we decided to do to cast this trial as the murder trial of Justine Ruszczyk-Damond and Damond, not the trial of Mohamed Noor. For obvious reasons, we don't want to profile a group of people. We have in that same area Ilhan Omar, who is a local representative from there in the Congress. So to sort of calm things down, we are using that title. We're on the 16th of April 2009, one day after tax day in the U.S. DJ Trump was also in Minnesota on tax day. He had a forum at a trucking company. Protesters, of course, were there also. Thus, we'll get right into this. We're using local sources here, the public radio in Minnesota and the local newspaper, the Star Tribune. So we'll start off here, an interesting article. This was on 14th, maybe? Actually, it was on the 15th. The Noor trial unfolding amidst a debate over the blue wall of silence. Now, the blue wall of silence is something not confined to this particular murder case, but is a national pattern. And one of the things we like to do at our broadcast is tie all of these murder cases, and we'll call them murder cases, the vast majority of these involve African Americans, particularly males. Now, in this case, Ms. Ruszczyk-Damond was an Australian, thus a European, has caused some more problems. They're really not set up to do this. I'll read a little bit of this. Prosecutors in the murder trial of the former Minneapolis cop Noor are determined to put his one-time partner on the stand despite raising questions about his ability to accurately testify about the night Justine Ruszczyk-Damond was shot. As the prosecution anticipated, star witness Matthew Hannity was the only other person there the night that Moore murdered Damond. And that was in July of 2017 after the two officers responded to a 911 call. Compounding the complications, the assistant district attorney Patrick Lofton told jurors in the opening statement last week that the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the agency tasked with investigating the shooting, repeatedly fell short. And that was the reason the county attorney or state's attorney took charge of this case, and ultimately, because of the blue wall of silence, took it to a grand jury. They made some assumptions, and they tried to fill in the gaps, but they'd been doing this a very long time. In the case of Philando Castillo, an African American in St. Paul, Minnesota, was killed in one of the suburban outlets there, but the same assumption. The only difference was his girlfriend, a partner at the time, actually was able to video him sitting in his car dying or dead and put it on to Facebook and YouTube immediately. Did not happen in this case. as the intentional, as the international watched. I need to adjust my workstation here. As the internationally watched trial enters its third week, prosecutors are placed in the unusual position of relying on testimony of officers and investigators whose credibility they have at times questioned. That is an immense problem there. In pretrial filings, the prosecution wrote that the jurors should be instructed to question the credibility of any officer's testimony if he or she demonstrates an unwillingness to give a full or truthful testimony because of a bias towards the police. Similarly, the behavior and statements of particular officers and investigators at the crime scene and during the investigation that demonstrated bias are relevant to show how and why certain evidence was or was not acquired or presented. And that is a big problem in this case. When you have very sloppy evidence or planted evidence, we go back to more than 20 years ago, the trial of Century, the People versus Orenthal James Simpson, and what happened with the LAPD planting blood and various other things there. The LAPD crime lab, which is a brand new crime lab. They should have named it after O.J. Simpson. Regardless, 10 of the 13 witnesses called for the trial have been Minneapolis police coppers or specialists from the state crime unit. Noor has maintained his silence since Damond's death, declining to speak with investigators from the state to a grand jury investigating the shooting, and it is unclear whether or not he will testify in this trial. Some legal experts say that it makes a little sense for the prosecution to cast doubt on the credibility of Harity. Those testimony would be critical to both sides of the argument. If anything, the state may be trying to lay a foundation for a later effort to coordinate, to convince the jurors that an officer was being untruthful in his or her testimony. Experts say, but the tactic could backfire, and a veteran defense attorney stated that if it includes the BCA and the Minneapolis Police Department, who are they going to have to investigate these cases? Well, the answer is the FBI, who successfully defended. He was in the Philando Castile case, and that was Geronimo Yanez. But Yanez and his case was different. The jury basically had their mind made up, with exception of one or two, before the trial was over. It's my experience working with any of these law enforcement agencies. They have a long memory. What he's saying here is that, and this is the element of blue wall of silence, and it's playing out more so in Chicago, where you have a transition in terms of administration there, a new mayor in Ms. Lightfoot, and thus a progressive mayor taking charge there, a progressive state's attorney also there in Chicago. So in other words, things are changing. The only thing you have in place there is the Chicago PD. Now, this becomes a situation when you, in any community, start to have transitional politics. The same thing happened in Baltimore, with the state's attorney was elected there. In Ferguson, or actually in St. Louis, a new state's attorney or county attorney was elected there based upon the murder of Mr. Brown. So we are seeing these changes, but at the same time there are reactionary forces out there, primarily that embolden themselves because of the administration of DJ Trump. And now this in itself changes a different atmosphere. But what is happening in all these police departments, whether it be the one in Minneapolis, Chicago, Baltimore, or Cleveland, where the young Mr. Rice was murdered, and various other murders, the communities that they are policing have changed. More and more people of color in those communities, so it's a demographic change. And in many of these cities, it is a political change. The government, as it is in this particular city here in the Midwest, is a progressive administration. So they're going up against a police department that many of the officers, like Noor, do not live in the city. They live outside of the city. So these are causing all kinds of internal conflicts. And as LBJ would say, that anyone's been to a goat roping contest understands that their day, the blue wall of silence, is a day that is limited. The sun is setting on it. It doesn't matter if it's set in this particular trial, but this particular trial will have an important impact. Whether or not this character Noor is found guilty or not is not going to matter as much, because then comes the civil trial. And the rules of evidence, of course, in a civil trial, the preponderance of evidence is different. And the community mindset. This community where Ruszczyk-Damond was murdered was a community that looked upon the police in a favorable light for the most part. Now that is not the case. Let me get back here to this. The feud intensified last year when Freeman is the state's attorney here, began subpoenaing dozens of officers involved in the shooting, and some of the officers, including the chief, who is an African American, Arandu, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right, spoke with the prosecutors voluntarily, but others were threatened with criminal contempt unless they testified. The union said, well, that is the case. When you are called to a grand jury, you convey in attempt. Ms. Manning, she's in jail now for not testifying before a federal grand jury. The standoff forced Freeman this is state's attorney, to convene a grand jury to compel the officers to testify. State's attorney said later. President Police Union, a known Nazi, suggested that officers had been less than straightforward with the prosecution. There is an easy, sweeping statement to make, and without other concrete, hard evidence, which they wouldn't find in this case, he said. He went on to send an email to officers urging them to prepare themselves for a hostile questioning if they're called to testify. Paraphrasing the email, Noor said he told officers, choose your words carefully. Better to prepare and see what the lines of questioning is going to be on this than be blindsided. Body cameras. Now that's another very important situation played during the testimony that was last week. Showed officers switching the devices off when speaking with colleagues in the aftermath of the shooting. Additionally, they offered Noor and Hannity on solicited advice to keep quiet. In other words, establish a blue wall of silence. And as a comment from the public defender named Mary Moriarty has said that her office keeps running a list of officers they believe are caught lying or falsifying evidence, but she's unaware of any of these officers accused of covering up for a colleague's misdeeds. And Joshua Page, an assistant professor of sociology at the University of Minnesota, says the dangerous reality of police work tends to breed an insular culture that resists change and outside influence. Well, the unfortunate problem is when you are a public employee, whether enforcing the law or this, there's an argument some make, well, police officers should be paid. The NAACP said that years ago because it's a dangerous job. Well, the job is relatively dangerous, yes, but in many of these police departments, and we'll get into this in a minute, rarely is an officer killed in the line of duty. Paul Applebaum, he's an attorney based in St. Paul who has represented clients who have sued the police for alleged misconduct, said he wasn't surprised that the prosecution in the Noor case has met some resistance from the officers. They are having to deal with a unified front that civil rights lawyers have to deal with all the time. There's no doubt about that. That is a long-serving situation. Let me jump back here. Now, this is 1/15th, I believe, also. Prosecutors in the Noor case query officers, cops on behavior. Now, called into question the actions of several police officers. They arrived at the scene. Testimony revealed that two of the officers broke protocol by turning their body cameras off. Tension in the murder trial, the former cop Noor, during the questioning, Arandu. Arandu is the police chief. At the same time, in 2017, you would expect that the body cameras were on. That is, attorney here, one of the state's attorneys, and Sweeney asked Arandu, who was the assistant acting chief at the time. This is correct, he said, adding that the expectations were the same for officers who had drawn their guns on as Noor and his partner Hannity allegedly did when they drove down an alley before encountering Ms. Damond. The prosecution seemed to take aim at the credibility, police credibility throughout. The pointedly asking high-risk sergeants why he failed to file a report about the incident despite responding to the scene and speaking with Noor. They also pointed to the first firefighter on the scene about how he was given a little information about what had transpired as he tried in vain to save Ms. Damond's life. She was killed on July the 15th, 2017. A bullet straight through a major artery there, and you are dead. Arando testified under the Minneapolis police body cam policy. At the time, officers were expected hit the record button and when they conduct traffic stops or any other sort of contact where an officer believed that there may be an adversarial situation that develops. Prosecutors have argued that the fact that Noor and Hannity did not activate their cameras, what should happen there, these cameras should be automatically activated. They should not leave it up to the officers to activate the cameras. They should be automatically activated, and any privacy concerns could later be taken care of by effectively goose pinning the video that can be done. But the video itself would be intact. It's just what would be released to the public. The program was in its infancy, and officers were unfamiliar with the policy. That is a lie. Arando told the jurors that the issue with the department. This is another situation here about the ambush because of what happened in New York. In New York, didn't have any credible evidence that any copper in Minneapolis was being targeted. The defense's key argument is that Noor and Hannity had police ambush on their mind. This is a lie that they made up after the fact here, and they talk about Dallas. And also what happened there, the supervisor of Noor and company was a police officer that had killed an African American about almost 30 years ago. And then there was another character involved in a shooting incident of Jamar Clark was also on the scene. So in other words, there's a rogues gallery operating there. Body cam video from partners Nicholas England, Kyle Matter were played in the court. Them drive to the scene. Hell goes on. One asked as they drove, they testified that the call for backup and did not notice that it was an officer involved shooting. So in other words, this whole scenario is bad. It points. Lofton told jurors during the opening statement, and in a criminal trial, as in a civil trial, the opening and closing statement. The opening statement, you lay out your case, the bare bones structure of it, and then you fill in the lines as you go along with witnesses. And remember now also, as in a civil situation, depositions and discovery in criminal trials, depositions have already been taken as to what these people will testify to. Officer Ty Judy's later testified that arrived at the scene assuming it was an officer involved shooting, though no one had told him immediately. Judy's said no one informed him that a shot had been fired. So there's a lot of this and that in this case, as one would say. Turned on the witness stand, caused controversy when Lofton tried to address the fact that he and several other colleagues refused to meet with Hennepin County Attorney's Office to talk about the case. And this goes back to the Blue Wall unsuccessful, necessitating a grand jury that found their participation via subpoenas. Judge in there, Quinzen, could excuse jurors to deal with the erupting dispute between the prosecution and defense attorneys. Lofton was able to ask if he was the one of about 20 officers who refused to meet with the state's attorney before the grand jury, and whether he attended a meeting. Now, there was a meeting, a so-called secret meeting in the basement of the courthouse to address requests to speak with officers. Outside the hearing of the jurors, Quinzen asked what role Judy's had in answering questions about this conspiracy. We are not saying it's a conspiracy, Lofton said. This was the judge's words, conspiracy. I was not being sarcastic when I used the term conspiracy, the judge said. And this is very interesting coming from the judge. It continued prosecution misconduct, and that's what the defense has been saying. The suggestion of conspiracy is reckless. Quinzen ruled that the prosecution could not ask about the union meeting, although they could investigate any potential bias. Now let's go to NPR. And this is a secret meeting. Cops held a secret meeting. That's the headline here from NPR. It was on the 16th for the day on the Ruszczyk shooting. Maybe we'll change hours to that. Last year, the state's attorney Freeman accused uncooperative police officers of leaving him no choice but to call a grand jury in the Ruszczyk-Damond case. This week, the prosecution and the trial of Noor are revealing more about the events that allege a lack of cooperation. They said officers and union officials held a meeting to discuss withholding information from a criminal investigation. That's obstruction of justice on the July fatal shooting. The meeting took place in the cafeteria of the Hennepin County Government Center prior to the refusal of about 20 officers to talk to investigators. That is the Assistant State's Attorney there, Patrick Lofton. The judge, Quinlan, warned the prosecution and not to interview witnesses about the meeting, saying it's not irrelevant to the case. She said that the prosecution could show officer bias by highlighting their refusal to testify, but not through a talk of a secret meeting. Well, it was a secret meeting. Wasn't too secret, though. It was in a cafeteria. We don't know if the cafeteria was closed at the time of what. Probably so. Defense attorney Wall characterized the prosecution's stance as continual prosecutorial misconduct and said the suggestion that of this conspiracy is reckless. Quinlan classified that she characterized the officer's refusal to cooperate as a conspiracy. She was not sarcastic. If 20 officers are meeting in the basement to decide not to tell what they know to the state's attorney, that is a problem, Judge Quinlan said. I don't think that Mr. Noor is a problem. So he went on to drill this guy named Ty Genderer. Anyway, about refusing to be interviewed and to pair trial with prosecutors. Activists captured Freeman at expressing frustration about the investigation. In order to compel information from police officers, he decided to convene the grand jury. That was in January of 2018. After jurors left the room, Lofton argued that the fact that the grand jury was convened is important for jurors to know, especially following the early testimony of Sergeant Gerard Kwanzi, who told the court that he didn't have a good reason for not filing a report after the shooting, even though he sat alone in his car with Noor. This thing just simply will not play very well at all at the civil trial. Millions of dollars are at stake here. The grand jury was convened because the officers en masse were refusing to come in. Quinlan also expressed outrage at one witness, the Police Officer Federation Noel told the Star Tribune this week about the Noor case. She said Noel, who was on the prosecution's list, had already violated the sequestration order for witnesses by attending a hearing in the court overflow room. Now, when you're a witness, when you're on the witness list, you cannot be in a court unless you have permission of the court prior to your testimony. And dozens of officers are on the prosecution's list of potential witnesses and have not yet been called. If you're on these lists, I mean, this whole case is just not a very good case to qualify. So this is basically what we have. We have the blue wall of silence, but usually that is an informal thing. It's not a situation where there is a meeting held and the term secret applied to it, that all of these officers were asked to talk to investigators at the county attorney's office, and it met and decided they would not do it. Now, that could have been an obstruction of justice, and charges could have been filed against them. And then, of course, once the grand jury was impaneled, they would have been hit with contempt citations and jailed, or whatever other sanctions come. At this stage of the game, if you get out of a mindset, now if the jurors have a mindset that the police are correct, the prosecution is, as they would say in terms, hosed. If this is a jury that is a fact-finding jury, then the defense itself could have problems, because their witnesses obviously are caught either lying, omitting things, turning off their body cameras, trying to convince Noor himself to obstruct justice. And one of the things is, this is usually a charge that police officers put on civilians all the time, just for being at the scene and saying something. They're obstructing the process of justice, or something to that effect, is always used. So this is going to be a very interesting trial as it continues to unfold, and we will bring you more information. And as we are here with Ms. Omar received more death threats here. Ilhan Omar said she faces increased death threats since the DJ Trump sent out this fake video. This is endangering lives, the Minnesota Democrat said in a statement that was on Sunday. I think we reported this on the Monday Morning Quarter. Her statement followed an announcement by Nancy Pelosi that she had taken steps to ensure the safety of Omar, and the speaker called for Trump to take down the video. Soon after the statement, the video disappeared from a pinned tweet at the top of Trump's feed. She's out of control, except her control of Nancy. Anyway, he probably escalated the standoff Monday morning, tweeting that before Nancy had lost all control of Congress and is getting nothing done, decides to defend her leader. Representative Omar should be looked at as anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. U.S. hate statement has made. Now, this is where Trump is confused. Anti-Semitic, anti-Israel. Well, definitely she's anti-Israel and should be. Pelosi was amongst the Democrats who criticized Trump over the tweet, and with some accusing him of trying to incite violence against the lawmaker. Amy Klobuchar, she's a candidate for president from Minnesota, said she was appalled by the video Trump posted. I think that Omar has a right to be safe as a member of Congress, and she already has very serious threats on her life. And when the president puts a video that simply adds to the hate and adds to the threats. Now, DJ Trump is also, if this woman is harmed, has opened himself up to if she is harmed or is killed, is a wrongful death suit, and he would have to stand trial for that. In other words, that's why the video came down. Somebody pulled him aside and told him to stop it. Very simple. Omar said that since Trump retweeted the video Friday night, she received a sharp increase in threats on her life, and that referred to or replied to the posted video. Violent crimes and other acts of hate by right-wing extremists and white nationalists on the rise in the country and around the world. She said we can no longer ignore that they are being encouraged by the occupant of the highest office in the land. She said we are all Americans. And the Capitol Police are on the case there. and Representative Omar is getting more protection. Now, she was speaking to the Council on American Islamic Relations, in which she described the 9/11 attack. It was on the World Trade Center. Some people did something, along with news footage of the hijacked airplane hitting Twin Towers. Trump captured his tweet, "We will never forget." There was incidentally a video of old DJ Trump talking about the Twin Towers and how his building was better. I think that was in the early 2000s. Critics accused Omar of being flippant in describing the perpetrators of the attack that killed almost 3,000 people. She later sought to defend herself by tweeting a quote from G.W. Bush, in which the Republican president referred to the attackers as people just days after 9/11. Neither Trump's tweets nor the video includes Omar's full quote or the content of her comments, which were about Muslims feeling that their civil liberties badly eroded after the attack. The tweet was posted atop Trump's Twitter feed for much of Sunday with more than 9 million viewers. It remained lower in the feed after Pelosi's request to pull it. Bernie Sanders questioned why Democrats weren't following Trump's example in calling out Omar too. When questioned, Democrats who criticized the president over the tweet defended Omar, with some noting that they had past disagreements with her. And this is what causes this entire thing, is the schism within the Democratic Party of a pro-Zionist policy. That in itself is what is causing the problem. Omar repeatedly has pushed fellow Democrats into uncomfortable territory with comments about Israel and the strength of the Jewish state's influence. There's no doubt about that. She isn't criticizing Jews, but she is refusing to take back the tweets. Jerry Nadler, a New York Democrat who represents Manhattan's financial district, which was targeted, said he has no issue with Omar's characterization of the attack. He has been a liberal around for a very, very long time. I have some problems with some of her remarks, but not with that one, he said. Sanders commented on a Fox News Sunday, ABC, Nadler on the State of the Union. That is a CNN program there. And I think I have basically exhausted this. Let's just get one other item in. Let me just check my time here. Okay. Bernie Sanders campaign. This is from the Washington Post. Escalates attack with establishment Democrats in a reprisal of 2016 party rips. And this is Wilkesburg Borough, Pennsylvania here. And an onslaught of is coming as Sanders sets atop national polls. There is a new poll out, and we'll get to that one, from the Emerson polling, Emerson University. Sanders addressed members of this is in Michigan. He is comfortable having the fight within the party and outside the party in general. That's Bernie Sanders. Sanders has been upset by a video by Think Progressive, a project of the Center for American Progress, a lack thereof. The orientation of CAP is positively engaged with all political leaders. That's a lie. Anyway, this is John Podesta / Hillary Clinton shop. So the struggle goes on. Basically, Bernie has disclosed his tax returns, and basically, since he offered some books, he for the last 2 years or so was in the millions. DJ Trump has not put anything out there. And this is some comments of Lena Anderson, a graphic designer in Youngstown, who attended a town hall meeting Sanders prepared in Sunday participate in. Sorry about that. Asked whether she felt that there was still animosity coming from the Clinton allies, she replied, "Hell yes." Ain't no doubt about that. There's a lot of animosity out there with these people. She said she attended the 2016 Democratic Convention, and that was extremely sickening the way Bernie's backers were treated. And this is the age-old question. A party, at least in our opinion, has the right to treat people within their core values if they want to do this, and with their rules. However, in politics, and particularly in the race that Bernie is in the race, atop some of the polls, second in other polls, they have to recognize where he is. He's running within the party. Now, if they're going to be biased and discriminatory towards him, whether he wins the nomination or doesn't win the nomination, there is spillover. And they can't blame Bernie supporters and progressives if they have a different nominee and these people decide not to back that nominee, because they've already told the Bernie people, the progressive people, we really don't need you, which translates to don't need your vote. And that in itself is problematic in some states. Can be very, very problematic. So now the beating up is starting, and it will of course intensify with the number of candidates that they have. There's no doubt about that. Let me just do this poll very quickly here from the Emerson people. You can't neglect them. They wouldn't want to be neglected. This is Monday's poll here. We read it earlier there, and this is some of how they match up here. This is a nationwide poll. Biden is 53 to 47 over DJ Trump. Bernie Sanders is 51 to 48 over DJ Trump. Harris is tied with DJ Trump. DJ Trump is 4 points ahead of Elizabeth Warren, and Trump is 2 points ahead of the mayor from South Bend, Buttigieg. And the approval rating here from Emerson for DJ Trump is 40%. And now we'll go to the actual polling here. This is a nationwide polling. This is the April national poll. Bernie takes the lead for the nomination, and Mayor Pete is on the move. Buttigieg there. 20 people there. Bernie is at 29%, followed by Joe Lunchbox Biden at 24%. They are followed by Buttigieg at 9%, by Beto O'Rourke and Kamala Harris at 8%. They're very close, bunching up there. And Elizabeth Warren, who has the largest staff out there, at 7%. Andrew Yang and Julian Castro at 3%. The poll was conducted the 11th of April through the 14th for Democratic primary voters with a subset N equals 356, and it's a positive 5.2%. And according to Dr. Kimball, he's the director of polling there. While still early in the process, it looks like Buttigieg is the candidate capturing voters' imagination. The numbers have him at 0 in mid-February, 3% in March, and now he's at 9% there. I guess the question is, who is he taking votes from? If Biden decides not to run, the prevailing wisdom is he would run. Bernie Sanders looks to be the early benefactor, picking up about 35%. Mayor Buttigieg about 17%, followed by Beto O'Rourke about 13%. Well, it's too early there. Beto O'Rourke is out there. And the problem is with Beto O'Rourke, he was in the House for 3 years, so he has a record. Whereas Mayor Buttigieg doesn't have a record other than in South Bend, and that's not much of a record, period. Now, on taxes, voters say they have 73% had filed their taxes, 17% plan to file on time, and 4% will ask for an extension. 36% of those filed their taxes say they were paying more compared to last year, with 29% said they are paying less. With the tables, that is what the case is. And campaign issues, 47% support building a wall on the U.S. medical border, 45% oppose it, and 8% are undecided. 41% do not think tech giants like Apple, Amazon, etc. should be broken up. 29% think that they should be. Elizabeth Warren has talked about that. 43% do not support American intervention in Venezuela to overthrow the Maduro regime. 27% support intervention, and 31% onshore. This is very interesting here. We still have that element out there. 55% of voters do not think individuals are currently incarcerated should have the right to vote. 30% believe that they should, and I believe it's in Maine where they do in fact have a right to vote in prison. 65% of voters think that felons who complete their prison terms they should have the right to vote. 23% do not. And that's basically about it. I think we talked about the credibility interval here as 3.2%. The data was weighted based on 2016 model of gender, age, party affiliation, etc. And that is that. 599 on 599 landlines they used in Amazon trunk. That is N equals 355. Let's do the sports now. We should have those NBA scores in here. 76 is 145 to 123. And the Clippers, 135 to 131. And they are moving around in the first round of their playoffs onto Major League Baseball, which is in full swing. Cleveland 6-4 over the Mariners out in Seattle. The Orioles 8-1 over the Red Sox in Boston. Fenway Park. In 11, the Mets defeated the Phillies 7-6. The Cubs were victorious over the Marlins in Florida. It was 80-something degrees there. They were glad to be out of Chicago and Wrigley Field. 7-2. The Cardinals were defeated in Milwaukee by the Brewers 10-7. High-scoring game. The Blue Jays in Minnesota 5-3 over the Twins. The Angels were defeated in Texas 12-7 by the Rangers. The White Sox in Chicago 5-4 over the Royals. That's been a series. The Dodgers pulled it out, a game we tuned into with a walk-off home run at 4-3. The Reds had 7 hits and 1 error. The Dodgers 5 hits there. Kenley Jansen ended up being the winner. Mr. Kershaw, I believe, was a starter in that game. The Rockies are 5-2 over the Padres. And on to the National Hockey League, which is in playoff status. The Maple Leafs are 3-2 over the Bruins, and they lead the series 3-2. And the Hurricanes defeated the Capitals 5-0. And let's see, this is in the series. The Hurricanes, Capitals, free. And what is the score here on this? Let me just check real quickly here. And hopefully we'll get it up here. Let me just, well, we don't have time. The Predators and Stars, they played a 3-2 there. And we can see the series is, they take it 2-3. The Stars 3-2 victory there. The Avalanche and Flames. Today it was the Avalanche. It had been the Flames, and what is it? For a 2-3 lead there. So we'll continue to monitor these various leads as we move along. Nonetheless, this has been the Justine Damond murder trial and the Blue Wall of Silence. We'll work on our introduction there. Get it as concise as possible on the 16th of April 2019 from WBIN Radio and on the Boston Red Network.